Good evening, live from ZTN studios in Harare, Zimbabwe. Welcome to The Chase, Zimbabwe's premier current affairs program. Our virtual discussion this evening, COVID-19 pandemic and the Sustainable Development Goals. Will the goals be achieved within the set framework? Hello, I'm your host, Andy Hodges. This broadcast is brought to you by Zimpaper's TV network, ZTN, and our partners, UN Zimbabwe. Now, to our millions of viewers joining online throughout Africa, Europe, America, the Middle East, and Asia, we would like to hear from you. So please join this discussion on our Twitter handle at ZTN News and via our Facebook page, Zimpaper's TV network. So please make sure we hear your voice. The COVID-19 pandemic's impact on lives and livelihoods has become a human and socio-economic crisis, impeding progress towards achieving the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. There are only 10 years left to implement the SDGs. Under the hashtag Decade of Action, 193 countries, including Zimbabwe, pledged to mobilize finance and communities, enhance national implementation, and strengthen institutions to achieve the goals by the target date of 2030. The Decade of Action asks for transformative economic, social, and environmental solutions. There is a need for inspiration and creativity at all levels of society: national and local government, civil society, the private sector, academia, and youth. A transformative recovery from COVID-19 should reduce the risk of future crises and intensify the Decade of Action in Zimbabwe. Joining us virtually this evening to discuss COVID-19 pandemic and the Sustainable Development Goals, will the goals be achieved within the set framework, are Professor Paul Mavima. He is Zimbabwe's Minister of Public Service, Labour and Social Welfare. Mrs. Maria Ribeiro, UN Resident Coordinator. Ms. Judith Kaulem, Director of Zimbabwe Poverty Reduction Forum Trust, and Leonard Mandishara, his Executive Director, the Association of Non-Governmental Organizations, NANGO. Welcome all of you to The Chase. Let me start with you, Maria. Maria, the Sustainable Development Goals, or Global Goals, are a collection of 17 interlinked global goals designed to be a blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. The SDGs were set in 2015 by the United Nations General Assembly and are intended to be achieved by the year 2030. The Sustainable Development Goals Report 2020, prepared by the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs in collaboration with experts and international agencies, tells a story of tentative but insufficient progress and warns of the regressive impact of the coronavirus pandemic. So in your opinion, Maria, what has been the impact of COVID-19 on the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals in Zimbabwe?
Thank you very much, Andy, and thank you very much for having us and having this opportunity to talk about the impact of COVID on potential impact on the SDGs. One of the first things to refer to is on economic growth, and whereas the ambition before the pandemic was declared was to see growth in 2020. Unfortunately, that has now resulted in a contraction of the economy, a continued contraction of the economy. I think the government estimates around 4.5%, though others may have put it a bit higher. One of the immediate impacts that we saw as well was that you had over 4 million children who were not able to access education during 2020. Thankfully, now measures are being taken so that schools can be safe and children can go back to school very soon. Remembering as well that Zimbabwe, the informal economy, the importance of the informal economy in terms of contributing towards GDP and also in providing the employment, where it's estimated about 70% of employment is in the informal economy and that it contributes to about 60% of GDP. Obviously, the measures that were taken to counteract the spread of the virus through lockdowns and other measures as well have had a very serious impact on the ability of people engaged in the informal economy to be able to meet their livelihood needs. So that also has had an impact. The other thing I would also sort of like to highlight is that the COVID-19 came and it didn't necessarily create the problems, but it highlighted the problems that existed, for example, in terms of social services, in terms of the health services and certain fragilities. Um, but it, but indeed, this is also an opportunity to identify ways of being able to address some of those fundamental issues which are uh, affecting progress towards the SDGs in a more sustainable way as well. Finally, just to also remember that lockdown and the measures taken on public health have at times also increased protection risks. Like we've seen an increase in terms of gender-based violence in very many areas as well. Um, but yeah, thank you.
No problem. Maria, commentators believe that the target date of 2030 was already ambitious, especially in Zimbabwe's case. So do you believe the target of 2030 for Zimbabwe to implement the SDGs is actually still achievable?
Well, the SDGs, by their nature, they are ambitious because it's not just that you achieve one or two SDGs; they're all interrelated. Whether it is from the first one about reducing poverty or eliminating poverty to SDG 16, which is about creating the enabling environment for the SDG, which is about governance and institutions. But not, in my opinion, the SDGs should be ambitious and they should also be audacious because they demand innovative and audacious responses by countries like Zimbabwe to really invest in areas where it's going to make a difference for an inclusive and sustainable development. And that's why it's important, as the government strategy one, that it keeps very much in mind what it wants to achieve, what is necessary to achieve in terms of the SDG, investing in social protection, investing in education, investing in sustainable employment opportunities for young people, investing in gender equality, as well as in the other areas. So my conclusion is ambitious, audacious, but it should be. We shouldn't let the bar down.
I like that. Ambitious, audacious, but it should be. We are now joined telephonically by Professor Paul Mavima. He's Zimbabwe's Minister of Public Service, Labour and Social Welfare. Minister, welcome to The Chase. Minister? Anyway, Minister Mavima, as the ministry responsible for monitoring Zimbabwe's SDG implementation, in your view, let me ask you bluntly, sir, can Zimbabwe meet the 2030 target? Hello, Minister Mavima?
Yes, Andy, I think I was muted.
No problem, sir. Did you heard my question?
Yes, Andy. We may miss it for one or two reasons. But in my view, we have what it takes to estimate the achievement of the SDGs. Everything will depend on how we pull together as a government, as a people, with the necessary partnerships for us to be able to estimate those SDGs. You specifically pinpointed Zimbabwe. Even in your question to Maria, the second question to Maria, implied that Zimbabwe might be in a more difficult position than other countries. But I would like to say, Andy, that I think Zimbabwe is in a fairly better position than a lot of other countries. I was in Congo Brazzaville where we reviewed the status of Africa, and even prior to COVID-19, Africa was off target, and indeed the entirety of the globe. But I want to say that Zimbabwe, in order to be able to estimate the SDGs by 2030, there is need fundamentally to look at how we can grow the economy as quickly as possible and to generate the resources that we need to invest in the areas that are fundamental to the development of a country. There are countries that have changed themselves around in less than 5 years because they did the right thing. And I would like to see Zimbabwe doing the things, the investments that then translate into innovation, into economic development, and essentially, Andy, education at all levels, primary, secondary education, and tertiary education are important. Health, in Zimbabwe, as far as education is concerned, much more emphasis needs to be put on basic education. We seem to have done very well in transforming our tertiary education, but our primary and secondary education is lagging behind. We still have schools across the country which don't have adequate infrastructure for everything. Teaching and learning infrastructure for teachers, also infrastructure that allows us to deliver e-learning, for example. We have to take care of that. In health, Zimbabwe needs to revive its primary healthcare system, which at one point was very, very good. So we need to reinvest in that healthcare system. The two are actually what gives you the fundamentals for economic development. So even as we target mining, as we target industrialization, as we target the transformation of agriculture, we need to understand that when those fundamentals are not in place, we cannot achieve the goals. Another thing, Andy, is the fact that we are a country which, if we put our heads together properly and we come together, all aspects of our society, we could generate a lot of internal resources that could go into the investments that I'm talking about. Just small-scale mining, well-organized, well-equipped with clear controls. Gold, for example, it alone can transform the country through the provision of the resources that we need in order to invest in the fundamentals that make the economy tick.
Thank you. Leonard, let me come to you. You're the Executive Director of the Association of Non-Governmental Organizations, NANGO, and I'm sure that the organizations you represent are daily involved in the SDGs in one way or other. So let me ask you directly, sir, in your opinion, can Zimbabwe meet the 2030 target?
Okay, thank you so much, Andy, for giving that question to us. I think it's also a very difficult question, just to also bluntly respond to say yes or no, because there are quite a number of factors that we need to consider as a country for us to be able to meet the Sustainable Development Goals come 2030. I think the first point that I would want to highlight, which is the perspective of the civil society also organization, is that if you look at the Agenda 2030, like what Maria has said, it is an ambitious global development framework that has advanced a number of programs that are supposed to be achieved come 2030, looking at the economic aspect, looking at the social aspect, also looking at the environmental aspect, looking at the institutional targets and goals. So you'd realize that there are quite a number of goals that were compounded or together so that at least nations by 2030 should have achieved those development goals. So it means it's an ambitious program. So the SDGs being an ambitious program, it then entails that as the government, if they want to position themselves to meet the development agenda, there is need to employ the business unusual approach in terms of the policies that they are going to be implementing, in terms of raising resources that are going to play a pivotal role to ensure that the programs and the policies and the initiatives that are key to the achievement of sustainable development goals are adequately, funded, and also to ensure that the enabling environment, that to assist all multi-stakeholders to effectively complement government in the agenda of meeting the sustainable development goals is also, supported. So what it means is that there is now a call, for the government to employ extraordinary measures with regards to the planning, the resourcing, and also creating an enabling environment. There are also presence of exogenous factors that also have a bearing in terms of the possibility or the probability of the country to meet the sustainable development goals. We talk about, the emergence of natural disasters, like in our case of Zimbabwe, we have experienced, I think, intermittent drought, which have a bearing also across a number of sustainable development goals, be it goal number 1, goal number 5, goal number 9, and also the issues to do with the global, health crisis that we are facing due to COVID-19, which also have, to a greater extent, an implication or impact in terms of the possibility of the country to be able to meet the sustainable development goals. So in this view, it shows that the country should do more if we want to meet the sustainable development goals. So it is clear that the chances for us to meet the sustainable development goals are minimum. But being minimum as a country, what are we supposed to do to enhance our chances of meeting the sustainable development goals?
Thanks, David. I want to bring Judith in here. Judith, from your perspective, I mean, you run a civil society organization. From your perspective and opinion, can Zimbabwe, maybe you could ask them briefly, can Zimbabwe, do you believe, achieve the SDGs by 2030?
Thank you, Andy. And I'm glad that in your introduction, you made reference to the UN report that indicated that the globe was not putting in enough effort that will make it sufficient for us to meet the SDGs. So it means it's a global problem. But the way I look at it, yes, we are talking of 2030. And in my view, I don't think even 2030 should be a problem as a target date, but it is an important framework that gives us a roadmap. Now that then makes us continuously check the pulse of our development trajectory. What is it that we are doing? Yes, we know that we might not be able to meet 2030 as a date, but what we are doing on a daily basis to develop, to ensure that people have a well-being that is conducive of dignity. And now that we are talking about moving forward after the pandemic or within an era of the COVID-19 pandemic, we want to acknowledge that while the disruption of the economic activity by the pandemic for economies that were more functional before the pandemic might be temporary, I still would want to believe that for Zimbabwe, it's still a major challenge. I want to agree with Minister Mavhima when he says it is important for us to put our heads together so that we can move as a collective. And in my view, I think for us to continuously move together, we have to make decisive decisions. For example, the areas that we need to focus on, especially with the learning from the pandemic. And in my view, I think it is important for us as we move forward to focus on areas of governance, building a new social contract. COVID-19 has shown us that if we don't put people at the center of the development initiatives that we embark on, it will then come to bite us. So we need to focus on our governance systems to ensure that they are inclusive, that they are people-centered. And I think we also need to focus on social protection, because it is people who push development. So it is important that we uproot inequalities. COVID-19 has shown us that when we develop and leave other people behind, when pandemics or disasters happen, we all become vulnerable. So as we move forward, for us to be able to achieve our maximum results of the SDGs, I think it is important that we focus on social protection. It is also important that we focus on the green economy. We talk about improving growth, but it can't be growth at any expense. It has to be balancing nature, it has to be balancing climate, it has to be balancing economy. So I think for us to even move in the direction that will make us realize the SDGs, we might not be able to meet 2030 as a deadline, but I think it is important that we are doing the right thing at each stage, right, so that we know that we are developing within the capacities that we have.
Minister Mavima, in order to make an informed decision, there would have to be oversight and feedback from the relevant line ministries on their progress in the SDGs implementation. So maybe you could briefly explain how exactly this is being done.
We have an architecture, Andy, where the Minister of Public Service, Labour and Social Welfare is the coordinating ministry in terms of, bringing together all the other ministries and indeed other agencies that are relevant to the implementation of the SDGs. But you'll find that the Secretariat is actually headed from the Office of President and Cabinet. And this expresses the importance that we place on SDGs. So we have that architecture, but like everything else where formal institutions are set up, there is need for those who lead to embrace, the objectives, the goals and objectives of that architecture and make it work. And not, we're talking of not leaving anyone behind at the people level, but also at government level. We just have to make sure that everyone is focused on the implementation of the SDGs. The relevant sectors have to be kept on their toes in terms of making sure that we do that. We haven't done very badly, and in terms of the transformations that are taking place. You see in the area of agriculture, for example, the new innovative ways in which we are trying to achieve food security, but also the aggressive program for irrigation development, dam construction, and then irrigation development. And also the assistance that is given to existing farms, some of them using boreholes and making sure that they have irrigation equipment. All that is important. I mentioned higher and tertiary education, and we are seeing a lot of work there where we are promoting innovation. But to answer you more directly, we have this architecture, but this architecture requires a focus on those who are responsible for coordination to make sure that everyone is staying on course and they are putting all their efforts in moving towards the implementation of the SDGs.
Minister Mavima, earlier on you talked about getting the Zimbabwean economy going, and progress has been made in that regard. And Zimbabwe has committed itself to implementing all the SDGs with an emphasis on SDGs 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 13 and 17. It is a fact, however, that the COVID-19 pandemic has forced the government to shift resources meant for other programs to much more pressing needs. I'll give you an example, such as purchasing of PPEs and vaccinations, just to name a few. How will such diversion of funding affect Zimbabwe's stated target of reaching the prioritized 10 SDGs?
Andy, I am just hoping that we are past the worst as far as COVID-19 is concerned. In fact, we are praying hard that we don't get hit by the so-called third wave, and that as a country we have taken a proactive stance to procure vaccines, and would like to see the vaccination program going on as fast as possible. We have lost resources, and there is no doubt about that. There are billions of Zimbabwean dollars that have been committed. But we need to now be conscious about that and then say, from the resources that we have, so that we could plow back on that loss and appropriately deploy in areas that give us the best return for investment. And like I said,
Hello, Minister? Okay, we seem to be having a little bit of sound issues there with the Minister. But anyway, let me move on. Maria, according to the UN Sustainable Development Goals Report 2020, COVID-19 threatens to reverse the progress of SDG-3, which aims to ensure healthy lives and well-being for all. I mean, we heard there the Minister talk about the health system in Zimbabwe and its need for spending on infrastructure and so on. Now, during the crisis, 70 countries have halted childhood vaccination programs, and in many places, health services for cancer screening, family planning, or non-COVID-19 infectious diseases have been interrupted or being neglected. Health service disruptions could reverse decades of improvement, warns the report. Allowing people to slip through these service gaps could affect population health for years to come. Your comment on this?
I think very much one of the big concerns, for example, here in Zimbabwe, as the government and the national response to COVID was developed, was, certainly at the beginning of the pandemic, we noticed that there was a decline in people's utilization of service or in the offer of services, including EPI and basic primary healthcare services. Also to mention mother and child health services as well. And I know that certainly this was a big, for the UN, with the Ministry of Health and Child Care, emphasis to make sure that services continued, that people did continue to have access to it, children continued to be vaccinated, that mother and child health would not be neglected. Obviously, as has already been mentioned, and indeed Professor Ravima mentioned it himself, what COVID did was it highlighted the fragilities of that system, but there was also a lot that could be done in terms of monitoring and supporting the healthcare workers in the ordinary health services to make sure that communities could continue to access that. Some of that was also people getting over their fear of going to a health facility. You saw that in other countries as well, besides Zimbabwe, including in some of the European countries where people were afraid to seek medical care for other conditions. But thankfully, it's not perfect, but there certainly has been an investment in not losing sight of the commitments and the programs for basic health care, such as EPI and the rest. And I think we did see surges in malaria, and it was important to attend to those. There were other surges in some disease areas as well. But I think the important lesson is that while dealing with a public health emergency, it's important not to exacerbate that emergency, if you like, by neglecting the other services as well. And also just to mention that it is health, but health also depends on nutrition, it depends on livelihoods, and that's why has been also very important to insist on investment in the social sectors and also in protecting jobs and livelihoods.
You're watching The Chase, Zimbabwe's premier current affairs program. Our virtual discussion this evening, COVID-19 pandemic and the Sustainable Development Goals. Will the goals be achieved within the set framework? Judith, I want to come to you and I want to ask you a multi-pronged question. The first question, of course, is the COVID-19 pandemic, how it's affected SDG 1, end poverty in all its forms everywhere, and if so, how? And in Zimbabwe's case, has any progress been made? And I also want to ask you, do CSOs, especially the Poverty Reduction Forum Trust, have any mechanism to monitor grassroots progress? What is actually happening on the ground with respect to SDG 1? And if we look at different sectors such as rural citizens, urbanites, women, youth, persons with disabilities, and the informal sector, are or should they be different strategies to implement SDG 1 in each? Judith?
Thanks, Andy. Yes, I heard you. Thank you very much. And maybe on your first part of the question, how COVID has affected SDG 1, which is poverty. I think we need to start by appreciating what are the drivers of poverty. And those include high levels of inequality. They include rapid economic decline. They include structural unemployment. And in my view, I think even before COVID, the indicators on these areas were already in a downward trend. So really, COVID has just exacerbated that situation. And I'll tell you something, Andy, as the Poverty Reduction Forum Trust, because we are saying poverty is also about the lack of basic needs. And at the Poverty Reduction Forum Trust, we undertake what we call the basic needs basket, which calculates the cost of a basket with basic necessities for a family of 5 to live a dignified life. And in February, that basket was at 34,498 Zimbabwe dollars. We could put that to US, it doesn't matter. But the question is, how many people in Zimbabwe can afford that kind of disposable income every month? I appreciate that the Minister of Public Service, Labour and Social Welfare, Honorable Minister Mavima, you are here, how you have tried to even increase the social protection that you are giving to people. And now I think it's standing at 1,500. So even if we were to give that to 5 people in a household at that rate, it would be 7,500. I also do appreciate that the ministry cannot cover everything, but we are talking here about that availability of those funds in a situation where the livelihood sources for most people that would have helped to complement what government and other development partners are giving to a family have been decimated by COVID-19. So really we see that COVID-19 has really affected SDG 1. We cannot speak of SDG 1 in isolation because these SDGs are really interconnected, which will bring me to the last, I think it was the last or middle part of your question, whether we can address sectors in isolation. I think it's interlinked. We need to take a holistic and inclusive approach in addressing the issues with regards to poverty, because it's about employment, it's about health, it's about education. All those come together and they contribute and they have an impact, a direct impact on the poverty situation of an individual or a family. So we really need to take a holistic and not a siloed approach to that. And I think your other question, Andy, was talking about civil society monitoring what happens on the ground. I believe that for civil society or citizens to be able to contribute to the development agenda of the country, first and foremost, they have to be empowered. They have to be empowered with information, with knowledge, with capacities. So as civil society, in our diversity, we do engage with citizens at different levels from different sectors. And we do realize that it is important for people to have information. So as the Poverty Reduction Forum Trust, our contribution has been on awareness raising, on the agenda itself, on what the sustainable development goals are and seek to do, and what people can do, what each one can do to contribute. So we have done that sensitization through different ways, where we have engaged through radio programs in collaboration with the government, through the Ministry of Public Service, Labor and Social Welfare, with the UN system. We have come together to try and sensitize citizens. But we also realize that if you speak as a single voice, then the impact is minimal. So what we have done as the Poverty Reduction Forum Trust is to facilitate a platform for civil society organizations in Zimbabwe under the banner of the Zimbabwe Civil Society Reference Group on SDGs, where we come together across sectors to put our collaboration, to put our voices, and to monitor. You have organizations that are working with children, right, organizations that are working with people with disabilities, that are working with the elderly. So each one then comes together, and when we meet, we do contribute and share what is happening in each of those sectors. And that process has also helped to even inform government. We know that with the SDGs, every year governments, through the voluntary national reviews, they do share the status of the implementation in the countries that will have volunteered. And Zimbabwe has done that in 2017. It's going to do that again in 2021. And through that platform, we are bringing together civil society perspectives and experiences from the ground to inform and to share and to contribute to that process as well. So in my view, that's another way of monitoring what is happening. But in doing that, to come to your other question of whether we can then address each sector separately, let me reiterate what I said earlier. I think what we have learned, what we have already known, but has been emphasized by COVID-19, is we can no longer do development in a siloed approach. Neither can we do development that is exclusive, that just looks probably at one sector and leaves another. So I think we need a holistic approach so that those individuals are multifaceted in the manner that they live. So we need to be looking at an individual in their holistic manner, so that somebody with disabilities has health issues, has educational issues. So we need then to take that kind of holistic approach. So in my view, we cannot take a siloed approach to development.
Thank you.
I hope I've answered your questions, and there were too many.
You have. Thank you very much. You're watching The Chase, live from ZTN Studios in Harare, Zimbabwe. This broadcast is brought to you by Zimpaper's TV network, ZTN, and our partner, UN Zimbabwe. Remember, we would like to hear from you. So please join this discussion on our Twitter handle at ZTN News and on our Facebook page, Zimpaper's TV network. So as I always say, make sure we hear your voice. Maria, even before COVID-19, the world was off track to end poverty by 2030 under SDG 1, with projections suggesting that 6% of the global population will still be living in extreme poverty in 2030. Now, an estimated 71 million additional people could be living in extreme poverty due to COVID-19. Do you believe that Zimbabwe is also off track to achieve SDG 1?
I think that Judith raised some very important issues about poverty. And I think one of the things that we need to do is understand the structure, the multifaceted structure of poverty here in Zimbabwe, as in any other country. And I think that the trends had already, even before COVID, because of climate change, because of drought, because of also the economic situation, that this was already having a negative impact on poverty levels in Zimbabwe. I think recent studies done by Zimstat with the World Bank have also shown that there has been a decrease in the value of people's wages and in the value of, and also in terms of employment, both in urban and rural areas in Zimbabwe in the past few months. But again, I would repeat that those trends were probably there before, and that what COVID has done is highlighted and exacerbated those trends. So in a sense, the challenge now for Zimbabwe and governments and countries like Zimbabwe is to really focus on policies and programs and investments which will begin to grow the economy again, which will begin to support women and young people as agents of change, which will focus on building resilience. So for example, just to give an example, UNDP, for example, manages the Zimbabwe Resilience Fund, which is a project that has supported 1.1 million people through a variety of interventions that includes skills training, crop and livestock activities, productivity, infrastructure development, access to water, renewable energy, and other areas like that. And the importance of that is that it's again sort of trying to take a holistic view of development, and that it has to involve citizens, but it also has to sort of show the investment that will actually lead to transformative change as well. One of the things that was done also, that the UN was also involved with the Ministry of Women's Affairs, was during COVID last year, was in how to make access to markets, particularly for women, safe, because women are involved in the value chain of food supply from rural areas to urban areas, and in urban areas, so how to make it safe. So it's also about going to scale on that and ensuring that climate smart agriculture, that these investments in renewable energies and in access to renewable energies continue, despite, or in some ways, turn COVID-19 into an opportunity to make choices and decisions about investment and how to reach those that are normally excluded, and how to sort of have a more equitable, inclusive development model in the country. The last point I want to make as well, is financing. And we often think of funding, but actually the discussion, and I hope that Professor Mavima will agree with me, is about how countries can finance inclusive, sustainable development, which is going to make a difference, particularly for those who are most poor and vulnerable and most marginalized. And I think that's also puts a challenge on the whole of society, because private sector is not a funder. It should be a financer and an investor, and also a part of the development scenario in the country. And I think also that, as Professor Mavima mentioned as well, was the importance of countries not seeing themselves on their own, but being able to we're all part of a global community. We're part of a Southern Africa region here, and that has enormous potential. And finally, to say that Zimbabwe is at the moment preparing its voluntary national report under the guidance of the Ministry of Public Service, Labour and Social Welfare. And this is an ideal opportunity to use the voluntary national review as an opportunity to consult and to listen, to take the pulse of different groups in society here in Zimbabwe, and to be able to sort of also spread the narrative on the SDGs, but also involve more people, particularly young people, in becoming agents of the SDGs in the country. Thank you.
Thank you. Leonard, let me come to you. Aims towards sustainable and inclusive economic growth, energy provision and infrastructure development had all been falling short before COVID-19 and faced considerable setbacks in the shadow of an economic recession. A recent AFDB report stated that Zimbabwe would require $34 billion over 10 years to fix or upgrade its infrastructure. So in the Zimbabwean context and in your opinion, has Zimbabwe's economic state impacted on achieving the SDGs targeted by the country?
Sorry, Andrew, you're asking me or?
I'm asking Leonard, Maria.
Yeah, I know. Sorry, I didn't realize.
No problem. Leonard?
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Andy, for posing that question. I think I would start by highlighting already the experiences that we already have, learning from the experience of the Millennium Development Goals. I think we are all aware that the global agenda that we are also implementing through the Sustainable Development Goals is succeeding the Millennium Development Goals that came to an end in 2015. So looking at the experiences of our country, I think we all agree that that is the same period that we were facing the lost decade, where from the period 2000 to around 2009, we experienced cumulative economic decline to the tune of 52%. And during that same period, our economy was not really performing. We lost in terms of our capacity utilization to the levels below even 10% capacity utilization in industries. And at the same time, we experienced massive exodus of the social sectors, be it our teachers and also the nurses, the health and the education professionals. And during the same time, we also experienced a massive dilapidation of the infrastructure across all the sectors. And because of that, this then contributed to a greater extent to the failure by the country to meet the Millennium Development Goals. So coming to the Sustainable Development Goals, we are still experiencing, like what you said, that COVID-19 came to compound some of the challenges that we're already facing as a country with regards to the level and the status of our infrastructure, be it in the education sector, the roads and transport sector, and many others. So it then means that if our economy is not performing, it has a direct impact and effect on the capacity of the country to be able to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. Because for that to happen, an enabling economic environment or macroeconomic environment is necessary as a country for us to be able to meet the SDGs come 2030. What does that mean? It means we need to experience a macroeconomic stability, where we're talking about the inflation rate, the exchange rate, and many other variables that are supposed to be stable for business to be able to thrive. At the same time, we are talking about massive increase in terms of the capacity utilization, where we are looking at the industry capacity to be able to produce. Because an economy that is not to produce, it means it will not also be able to service and to provide the goods that are necessary for the growth of the economy. So what we are saying is that there is a direct impact in terms on the state of the economy and also the potential for the country to be able to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. Also, in addition to that, what is also important is the capacity of the country to be able to raise domestic resources that are adequate to support the development agenda. I think we are all aware that nations are encouraged to depend more on domestic resources to support the implementation of the 2030 agenda. Because without that, it means whatever we are going to be doing, depending mostly on aid and external funding, is not going to be very much sustainable to support the strength of the development agenda. So what is very key now to say, if the economy is thriving, if industry is working, it also provides more opportunities to raise resources that can support the implementation of the development agenda. So basically, we're saying production and productivity of the economy should be a reality for the SDGs to be attained come 2030. Thank you.
Minister Mavima, you've heard there my other guests, Maria, Leonard and Judith, talk about how funding is critical. And you heard the number, $34 billion US. That's the figure given in the AFDB report. So I suppose the question is, where will Zimbabwe get that type of funding from? Because you yourself have stated, of course, that infrastructure development is one critical component of successfully implementing the SDGs.
And in fact, in my earlier contribution, I specifically said that we need domestic resource mobilization. And even though we may not achieve the SDGs to perfection, I really think, Andy, that an upper middle income economy is possible. And how do we achieve it? First of all, we target specific areas where resources are possible to get. Remember, I talked about the gold sector, which, in my view, government needs to work very hard to come up with a clear governance and incentive program, especially for small-scale miners, a program that says everything that we are getting goes into national coffers. I am quite happy about the possibility of agriculture turning around. The only problem, Andy, is that if we don't fix the irrigation system, then we are going to continue to be susceptible to issues of drought and other climate change effects. And we know in Zimbabwe that when agriculture sneezes, every other sector catches a cold. And that's our reality, unfortunately. I'm happy that this is going to be a good season. So government has to focus on those sectors where we can generate resources, internal resources, for the development of Zimbabwe. We are talking of a $12 billion economy, a mining sector. By 2023, we are talking of $8 billion industrial sector. By 2023, I think, or 2025, those aspirations ended. Beg the question of how and where can we get the commitment to do that? And also, what mechanisms do we put in place to say these aspirations are being implemented in an inclusive manner? Let me refer to China, for example, under Deng Xiaoping. It was the incentive system that they put into peasant agriculture that contributed immensely to the development of that country and changed the face of rural China and made it industrial. There is a way in which, if we can mitigate against the effects of drought and provide the necessary incentives that the smallholder agriculture, for example, family units really committed to changing their own livelihoods can contribute the resources that are needed for Zimbabwe. So, in my view, Andy, this country has the wherewithal to raise at least part of that $34 billion. We may not be able to get all of it, but if we focus on issues of governance, on issues of incentives, making sure that we are not losing, resources, illicit trade and other things like that, we can be able, like I said earlier, to generate own resources that will make us estimate the SDGs. I don't even know how else to say this, but this country has resources that if we utilize them properly, we can do much better in terms of, which is the fundamental thing, by the way, which is the fundamental thing, the growth of the economy. You can't tackle any of these SDGs without the growth of the economy. And then you say, how do we distribute and redistribute those opportunities and those resources to make sure that no one is left behind?
Thank you, Minister. Maria, SDG 4, which of course is achieve inclusive and equitable access to education, and the ministers mentioned about the need for infrastructure spending on education, and I think reports given that 3,000 new schools have to be built in Zimbabwe to meet our needs, particularly now under COVID. But I'd like you to comment on that. But furthermore, it appears that the world has made progress with regards to SDG 5, which is gender equality goals, with fewer girls being forced into early marriage and more women entering leadership roles. But however, women's well-being has suffered during COVID-19, with incidences of domestic violence increasing by 30%. I think you mentioned that earlier. And of course, a greater demand on women for unpaid care work. So from your perspective, has Zimbabwe made progress, or has the pandemic also forced a setback with regards to SDG 5? I'd ask you to be brief, because we are coming to the end of the program, unfortunately. Maria?
Hello?
Maria?
I am sorry. I was muted.
No problem.
Focusing on women's equality, I mean, the Secretary General has said if there's no women's equality, there will be no sustainable development growth either. So I think Zimbabwe definitely has to continue on the trajectory. There have been some progresses, and there are policies which can create the enabling environment for women, but that actually does mean in turning those policies into real concrete investments and activities. And it's also about making sure that women are part of decision making. And in fact, it's quite interesting that the COVID-19 task force in Zimbabwe is chaired by a woman, which is the Minister for Defense, in fact, which is quite unusual compared to other countries. But definitely there has been progress, but much more needs to be done, and women need to be seen as agents of development and having agency. And also to participate in the decision making. So a lot more lifting has to be done.
Thank you. I have to ask my guests, we are coming to the end of the show, but I do want to ask you all just a final question. Let me start with you, Judith. The importance of the private sector getting involved in implementation of the SDGs. I think that's my first question, how important you think it is to get the private sector involved. And furthermore, achieving transformative vision of the SDGs by 2030 may require a major realignment of Zimbabwe's national priorities towards long-term cooperative and drastically accelerated action. Your comment, is this possible in Zimbabwe's case? I have to ask you to be brief, unfortunately.
And yes, thank you very much. Whether it's possible or not, but I think it's quite crucial, because private sector is a key stakeholder if we are going to be looking at achieving the SDGs. Because when the SDGs are focusing on people, on planet, on the environment, and when we talk about the issues of climate change, which are very key, you find that the private sector plays a key role in terms of providing decent employment. It also plays an important role in terms of responsible production, because if private sector is not going to change its behavior in terms of production habits, then it means climate change will continue to be a challenge. So I think it's important that private sector comes on board. But for me, it brings back the idea of the strategy that the government has, that it has to move from being a whole of government to being a whole of society, so that we have all stakeholders in there. Right now, in my view, I think private sector is really lagging behind in terms of being a key player in the SDG implementation. And I think it's important, it can be done. The Ministry of Public Service has demonstrated coordination abilities so far, but I think they need to broaden them to bring private sector on board so that it can contribute, and we will not be able to achieve most of the SDGs if private sector does not play its role in that regard.
Thank you,
So
Judith.
we need a whole
thank you on that. Let me ask my other three guests their final question. Leonard, in your opinion, let me ask you the same thing. Does Zimbabwe need a major realignment of our national priorities to achieve the transformative vision of the SDGs by 2030? And I'll ask you to be brief.
Okay, thank you so much, Andy. I think maybe my small submission to that is what I feel we need to do is to have a major transformation in the way that our government is committed in terms of the implementation and executions of the plans that are developed, the good policies that are developed, which are key to address some of the development challenges that we are facing. Thus, most importantly, we need a paradigm shift in the execution of our national development plans or priorities for us to be able to meet the sustainable development goals. So I think this is my simple submission to say, as a country, we need to make sure that there is marriage between our national development plans and also our national budget for us to be able to implement these programs to attain the sustainable development goals. Thank you.
Minister Mavhima, we are coming to the end, but I want to just give you 30 seconds. And it may sound like a funny question, but I think it's important. Is it important that Zimbabwe implements the SDGs from an African perspective?
Yes, it is. We, as Zimbabwe, for example, we have to place ourselves to take advantage of the newly established Africa Free Trade Area. There are lots of opportunities there, and we are placed in a very good position to take advantage of that. Also, Africa orientation will mean we are looking at what resources we have and harness those resources, both for export, but also for attracting other investors into Zimbabwe. But let me end by just saying, Andy, the earlier question you asked about the role of the private sector is so important. The private sector has to be the driving force behind the economic growth, which leads to the achievement of several other, the sustainable development goals. And this can be done with clear leadership of the youth, with clear leadership of the women, as long as our policies are oriented towards that. So, yes, Andy, the private sector is going to be crucial, and the Zimbabwean government has to harness the innovative, talents within the private sector, but mainly focusing on those groups and providing a facilitative environment for them to flourish.
Thank you, Minister. Maria, let me ask you a final question. If reports back indicate that the Zimbabwe government may not achieve the 2030 targets, what actually is the fallback plan? Would the UN and its member states assist countries like Zimbabwe? What is the plan if countries cannot meet that 2030 goal?
Well, first of all, let me say it's not a fallback plan. There's only a fall forward plan, because it's unlikely that every country is going to arrive, or the countries will arrive at 2030 and suddenly we have sustainable development for everybody. But I think what we hope is that Zimbabwe will, by 2030, have achieved sufficient progress in growing its economy and implementing its reform and policy agenda that will make a difference and will ensure that people, the citizens of Zimbabwe begin to feel that there is a difference, there is a reduction in poverty. So it's not about achieving 100%, but it is about being on the right trajectory to move forward towards sustainable and equitable development in Zimbabwe.
Thank you very much. As Maria said, ambitious goals, but they should be. We have come to the end of our show tonight. The show, of course, The Chase. I'd like to thank our guests, Professor Paul Mavima, Zimbabwe's Minister of Public Service, Labour and Social Welfare, Ms. Maria Ribeiro, UN Resident Coordinator, Ms. Judith Kaulem, Director of Zimbabwe Poverty Reduction Trust Forum, and Leonard Mandishara, Executive Director, Association of Non-Governmental Organizations, NANGO. Thank you very much to all of you for appearing on The Chase this evening. You have been watching our virtual discussion, COVID-19 pandemic and the Sustainable Development Goals. Will the goals be achieved within the set framework? This broadcast was brought to you by Zimpaper's TV network, ZTN, and our partner, UN Zimbabwe. Well, that's it for me this evening. All I can say to you is I'm Andy Hodges. Good night, and please, you all be safe.